Our nonprofit, nonpartisan coalition, comprised of over 50 national organizations, including consumer groups, health plans, patient advocates, community-based organizations, behavioral health groups, and private sector innovators from across the United States, all share a mission to create a more socially connected nation. Through disseminating research findings, leading public awareness, and advocating for legislative and regulatory reforms, the coalition envisions a society where every individual will one day have the opportunity and support necessary to be socially engaged. I also want to take a moment to thank our very dedicated and diverse board of directors. Many of them are here with us today. Also, of course, our incredible team at the coalition, led by Jillian Rakusin, our executive director. Let's give them a round of applause. You know, in 2017, the United Kingdom's Marmalade Trust launched Loneliness Awareness Week, and this year we are once again elevating it on the global stage to raise the visibility and spread awareness of the value of social connection. We've seen so much momentum recently to address our loneliness epidemic, but there's still so much more to be done, and that's what brings us together today. As we learned from the US Surgeon General's advisory last year, as we think we all know at this point, 1 in 2 Americans, 1 in 2, report experiencing loneliness. And Gallup's Global State of Social Connections report found that nearly 1 in 4 people worldwide feel very or fairly lonely, equating to over 1 billion people globally. These are astonishing numbers. We're thrilled to have each and every one of you here today, in person as well as virtually, to come together and recognize the need for global action. In partnership with the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, we put together a series of conversations to dive into the role of social connection as a catalyst for action related to public health, civic engagement, and the development of resilient communities. And we look forward to starting these conversations with this opening plenary featuring inspiring thought leaders and change makers from around the world. Now, I'm honored to introduce our first speaker, Haben Girma. The first deafblind person to graduate from Harvard Law School, Haben Girma is a human rights lawyer advancing disability justice and one of the World Health Organization's commissioners on social connection. President Obama named her a White House champion of change, and she's received the Helen Keller Achievement Award, a spot on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, and Time 100 Talks. Haben believes disability is an opportunity for innovation, and she travels the world teaching organizations the importance of choosing inclusion. Haben Girma, welcome to the 2024 Global Loneliness Awareness Summit.
Hello, everyone. My name is Haben Girma. It's an honor to be here. I am deafblind, and that is really important in this context because ableism is a significant barrier in preventing people from connecting with their communities. A lot of the spaces around me were designed for people who can see and hear. The schools, the libraries, the community centers. And the burden is often put on disabled people to find solutions. I have terrible vision and hearing, but my sense of touch is excellent. So I was seeking touch-based solutions, and tech has evolved to create more touch-based solutions. I now use a Braille computer with an external keyboard that I use for communication, and I'm using that in this presentation. Can we pull up the first photo? So this is a photo from the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm standing by a table reading from a Braille computer. Across from me, President Obama is typing on a keyboard, and President Biden is also in the photo watching the conversation. They typically communicate by voice, but when we explain that I'm deafblind, and access information best through Braille, they graciously switched from voicing to typing so I can access their words. Accessibility, connection can often be a small change, like switching from voicing to typing, saying yes to stepping outside your comfort zone. There are people who say yes, but there are still quite a few people who say no. That's strange. That's different. And that falls under the umbrella of ableism. And I'll share that slide. Ableism. Ableism is the set of beliefs and practices that treat disabled people as inferior to non-disabled people. So when we build schools, only imagining non-disabled students at those schools, or we build websites and apps, only imagining non-disabled people accessing those websites and apps. Some people say, well, we didn't mean to discriminate. That is still ableism. Unintentional ableism is still ableism. We need to be planning for accessibility. We need to plan for deaf people, hearing people, blind people, sighted people to be included into our communities. So, because so many disabled people face barriers like ableism, to try to connect with their communities, many of us have come up with solutions to help us connect with our various communities. Deaf people all over the world have developed sign languages. The dominant one in the US is American Sign Language. In Mexico, there's Mexican Sign Language. I do not know Mexican Sign Language. And when I'm in Sonora, Mexico, my friend Yair Alejandro, let's share that video. He interprets for me. And in this video, he is signing. I'm holding my hands over his hands to feel his signs. And he is deaf and sighted, so he can see my signs. We often think of disabled people as the ones who only need help, but many times we are the helpers, we are the innovators. Yair is my interpreter with the deaf community in Sonora. I'm blind and I have been a guide for many of my blind friends. Disabled people, when we encounter ableism constantly all over the place, that sparks innovation. And those innovations can help the greater community. So sign languages are different all over the world. In India, there's Indian Sign Language. Photo, please. I visited Kerala, and this is from the National Institute of Speech and Hearing. We have an auditorium full of people signing ILY. It's the sign for respect, love, admiration. It actually started in the United States, and through connections between the deaf community in the US and abroad, it has spread, the sign has spread. And some people ask, wouldn't it be easier if all deaf people used the same sign language? Well, wouldn't it be easier if all hearing people spoke the same language? Sometimes when we're working on accessibility, there is a desire to simplify accessibility, to flatten disabled people, to make us all the same. But we need to celebrate all the different languages, sign languages, accessibility solutions, and different ways disabled people connect. When we design for accessibility, when we design for disability challenges, we create solutions that help both disabled people and non-disabled people. And this happens so often, we have a name for it. It's called the curb cut effect. This term came out of Berkeley, California. In the 60s and 70s, disabled people advocated for curb cuts. Those are the ramps at the end of sidewalks. So you'll have a sidewalk, a ramp going down to the street, and then a ramp going back up onto the sidewalk on the other side. Disabled people wanted that, but the city said, it's too expensive. It'll take too long. And without those curb cuts, it was difficult for people who use wheelchairs to move around the city, to go to school, to work, to coffee shops, to church. It was a physical barrier that prevented connection. Advocates kept pushing for the need for curb cuts. And finally, the city installed curb cuts. People who used wheelchairs gained greater freedom and mobility, navigating around Berkeley. Parents pushing strollers also found it easier to move around the city. Travelers pulling luggage, kids with skateboards, lots of surprising ways, lots of surprising uses came out of the curb cuts. And in 2024, autonomous delivery robots benefit from the curb cuts. When you invest in a disability solution, you pave the way for greater innovation for the entire community. This is true in the physical world. It's also true in the digital world. Captions on videos, that's the text on screen on videos, started as a feature to help deaf people get access to the audio of videos. But this benefits hearing people too. And lots of researchers have found that videos with captions outperform videos that don't have captions. So when you embrace accessibility, you're helping disabled people connect, you're helping fight ableism, and you are making a world easier for non-disabled people as well. As we explore how to help people connect, how to fight loneliness and isolation, let's listen to disabled innovators. Many of us have come up with solutions to help us connect, and these solutions can help both the disabled people and non-disabled people. So help teach people to notice ableism and help remove it from our communities. Thank you.
Such inspiring words and work from Haben and Girma, and it's a reminder of how important our work here in Washington is, but is also globally, and the impact that we're having as a community of leaders. Now let's shift back home here to DC to look at our work in the US. I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce my friend and colleague, former Congressman Patrick J. Kennedy. Congressman Kennedy, who's here. Congressman Kennedy served with distinction for 8 terms in Congress, representing Rhode Island's 1st congressional district. During his 16-year tenure in the House of Representatives, Congressman Kennedy championed policies aimed at ending discrimination against those suffering from mental illness, addiction, and other brain-related disorders. Notably, he served as the lead sponsor of the landmark Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, which ensures equitable insurance coverage for mental health and substance use disorders. Following his public service in Congress, Congressman Kennedy founded the Kennedy Forum, a nonprofit that unites advocates, business leaders, and government agencies to advance evidence-based practices, policies, and programming in mental health and addiction. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. intimidating to have to follow Haben, and what an amazing story and personal courage and conviction she's demonstrated. So, and this is a global challenge now with social media everywhere in the world, and us all suffering from that same isolation that comes from being preoccupied by our devices. I just want to say I'm so honored to be here. I think what you're doing here is like the future of public health, and it can't be done soon enough. I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means for me that I've not had to use drugs, alcohol, or pills, potted powder since February 22nd, 2011. I'm doing that. Thanks. And that's by virtue of the fact that I attend 12-step meetings everywhere I go, and I've got a meeting guide app that takes me to the closest meeting wherever it is. And I also, on the car ride to that meeting, I can go to on a virtual meeting, and I've got cities across America logged onto my phone so that literally I have a meeting 24/7 whenever I choose to do one. And in person, I've got one down the street anywhere I am. So when people in recovery say that they're gratefully recovering, I think they're gratefully recovering because they have a ready-made organization of people that understand who they are and what their struggles are. And isn't isolation about feeling disconnected? I don't feel disconnected when I'm amongst my fellow drug addicts and alcoholics. We talk about the disease of addiction. We're all people in recovery from the disease, but I'll go rogue and say drug addicts and alcoholics, because we kind of got to keep our humility in check that, at the end of the day, we're only a drink or drug away from ending up in death or locked up or either in jail or an institution. It's just the reality. And if you never believed it, just look at the statistics today of overdoses and suicides to know that that sense of disconnection is what's causing these deaths of despair, because people feel like they're not able to identify that someone else is going through what they're going through. And when anyone comes into a meeting and they think that their lives are over, as I did when I first started going to meetings, that no one will understand what they've been through. I always tell them, in a few years, you're going to tell your story, and there's going to be someone whose life is going to be changed because you were able to make it through the very same things that they need to make it through. And because we're all thinking about ourselves, it's that self-centeredness that for those of us in recovery, we are the ones that are victimized by our own self-centeredness to the max. And so when we're told that actually this is not about us getting better, but it's about us having purpose, us having a way to take our story and help someone else not feel so alone because of what they're going through. When I left the United States Congress, because my illness is a progressive illness, if I don't work on it, it gets worse, not better. And I had to leave Congress as a result, and I left everything I knew, everybody I knew, and started by going to recovery meetings all the time. I felt like my life was behind me, like everything that I could never look forward to anything. 5 years into recovery, I get a phone call from the speaker's office. And they wanted me to come back and do an intervention on one of my former colleagues. Because, anyone else talking to a sitting member of Congress, that congressperson is going to be like, yeah, just like I was. Like, no one could do it. No lobbyist could do an intervention on me. None of my staff, nobody else. And you could have all the experts in the world come in, like Nora Volkow from NIDA or and say, Patrick, you got a problem. And I'm like, yeah. All I did was go into their office and say, let me tell you what it was like trying to do this job with an 800-pound gorilla on my back and how I had to struggle every day to make it through. I got about 10 minutes into my story and they're like, how did you know? I said, because this is what happened to me. And you can either do what I did for too long and think that you can just manage your way out of it because you've got all kinds of people to take care of it for you, or you can save your own life and finally get some help. My point is that no matter what walk of life, I see this, as all of us do, what's going on with Hunter Biden, how addiction has totally affected not only his life, but every single person in his family's life. And I think to myself, I can't imagine the good work that Hunter Biden can do in the future, because he experienced the depths of despair. He experienced all the usual, by the way, their usual kind of characteristics of these illnesses. And there are going to be people in powerful places who are going to be struggling. And Hunter Biden's going to walk in the room and their blood pressure is going to go down because they're not going to feel as alone because he's in the room to talk to them about his own recovery. That's the power of service. And in recovery, the keystone of service is to help the next suffering alcoholic. It's not to get better ourselves, although we have to get better to help others. It's to help the next suffering alcoholic. When I was growing up, I was so fortunate because I had this sense that my life was going to be about service. I don't know what it was, but I remember in first grade, instead of giving my teacher an apple, I promised her a living wage. That's how it. And so I, this was kind of and I have to tell you, because my uncles were killed prematurely, I got to hear from everyone that was never able to tell them how much their call to service meant in their lives. Because I was a Kennedy and a congressman, so I got to go to all these places, people would come up to me and tell me that their lives were changed forever when they heard President Kennedy to say, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I can't tell you how many people changed their lives when they heard that, because they felt that they were needed. They felt they had something that they could contribute. They felt a sense of value. And if you want to address social isolation, the first and foremost, you got to give people a sense of purpose and self-worth. And no matter what walk of life you're in, you can do that. And thankfully, we have the model originating with the Peace Corps, but being expanded to VISTA and the AmeriCorps program. And we now have corps everywhere in this country. And we can have environmental conservation corps. We have recovery corps for people to help build sustainable recovery community organizations. You have senior citizen corps where they're foster grandparents, where they help read to kids, where they join, daycare centers and are another kind of adult in the room that can watch kids play. Because I know for my part, all my child wants from me is to, when he looks up to see if I'm watching him play Legos, he wants to know that I'm looking at him. And that's what little kids want. They want to know they're in your line of sight. And we're all so busy on our phones, and then I have to intentionally, thanks to the fact that I'm in mental health, I know this stuff because I'm surrounded by a bunch of folks like you who remind me, you got to be intentional. Put that thing down. The strongest foundation you could provide for your child's emotional mental health is to make sure that they've got your complete attention when you're with them. And so I don't think it's going to be a hard thing to figure out. I mean, we can have all the systems changes, and believe me, in mental health, I'm up to my ears in boiling the ocean on, better prevention, better treatment, better recovery, building systems that ultimately get paid for, because if you're not putting money in the system, you're never going to get any of this stuff moving. but ultimately paying for things that have the biggest impact writ large, because too many of us in this movement are so consumed with the terrible tragedies of every individual case, we lose sight of the fact that we could making a dramatic difference in the total number of people who are dying of these illnesses if we looked at it from a public health point of view, dramatically. And so, you know, I think the goal here is obviously to not only put those systems in place, and we need all kinds of, you know, curated to-dos for this part of the system, that part of the system, surveillance, data, everything. But at the end of the day, we need a culture that says everybody has a role to play. And it can be in your place of work, you're helping your colleagues, because we all have to be allies to the people around us, to our family members, in our schools and communities, in our government. We all have a role to play, some different roles than others, but everybody needs to be imbued with the sense that we're all in this together. That sense of purpose and belonging goes hand in hand. And I'll just conclude with this. I had the honor of dedicating the John F. Kennedy Center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center trains all the Green Berets in our country. And President Kennedy was the one that awarded the wearing of the Green Berets. So they thought, you know, have a Kennedy come down. I happened to be in Congress, so it made sense for me to come down, give the speech. And of course, I get taken around by General Hugh Shelton, who was going to be the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs who was a Green Beret later on in his career. And he read my CV. So he stopped me as we're taking a tour and he said, "Congressman, the Green Berets have more mental health than any other branch of the service." And geez, General, I mean, the thing has my family name on it. Do you not think I'm going to be supporting you? Of course I'm going to support you. You don't have to tell me, butter me up with how great mental health is, because we all know, I mean, honestly, General, these Green Berets don't need mental health. They jump out of airplanes and they hit the water and they're swimming underwater for 5 miles without breathing. And then they come out on the beach and they speak 6 languages and they take out their target and they're reading to their kids by bedtime. I mean, these guys don't need mental health. And he said, "Congressman, you don't understand." I did not understand. He said, "We look at mental health as a force multiplier." And of course, I'm all around the disease model of mental health. Like, we got to treat it after it becomes pathologized, after people get sicker and sicker and sicker. But their model in the Green Berets is to look at how to maximize your optimum potential as a human being for the military in order to execute a military, you know, project. So they cannot have Green Berets in the field doing anything if that Green Beret has intrusive thoughts in their head. If they're wondering what's going on back at home, if they're worried about their spouse, their kids, what have you, it'll take them away from their mission preparedness, their mission readiness. And I thought to myself, if all Americans could hear that the top of the top, the creme de la creme of the U.S. military looks at mental health as the differentiator between being average and being the best of the best. We're all Americans. We want to be happier, healthier, you know, look better, eat better, whatever you want. We're all that more and more and more. We want to, you know, get everything that keeps us younger, happy. You know, the answer is mental health. It's an ability to self-modulate. It's an ability to correct counterproductive thinking patterns. It's an ability to have insight to those self-destructive patterns of behavior that, you know, sideline us when we could be living our best selves. But if we can't acknowledge and identify them, then we're never going to be of maximum use to anyone around us. Imagine in America If we said, I have to really focus on my ability to be of service to others, and the way I maximize my ability to be of service to others is to make sure I am able to maximize my own healthy health, mental health, because health is mental health. We would have people who are not locked in their amygdalas. Our country today is locked in their amygdalas. They do not have their prefrontal cortex working in this country right now. And the honest truth is it's fear, insecurity, which breed hate and intolerance. And it's a devolution because people have lacked insight to the fact that they're living in their amygdalas. We don't train anybody to understand how they can help guide their own thinking and to be intentional. And I'll conclude with this. If you give people an opportunity to serve, everything else will take care of itself because they're going to get that good vibe. That was why we're like, it's so counterproductive. We're all thinking me, give me my money. I want to be better. I want to be happier. When we stop and ask what we could do for someone else, boom, we're like, whoa, that felt good. And I'm taught, because I need someone to teach me this, like, you got to be intentional. Smile at someone, ask how they're doing, open the door for them, don't cut them off, Then, what can you do? Other things you can do to help people. Everyone, as Martin Luther King said, everybody can serve. And if people serve, you're not going to have to educate them on citizenship and loneliness and connectedness and anything else. Because if they get this, is like someone who's now addicted to service. Like I do what feels good. And because I'm not doing drugs and alcohol anymore, I've got to find other ways to feel good. And, I am telling you, thankfully, I get to do that every day because I'm surrounded by people who I can do something for. And if we give everybody an option to do something for someone else, it's not, you don't have to educate them, give them a sizzle reel, give them a curricula, they'll figure it out. We have to give this country a sense that everybody has a role to play. Everybody can make this country stronger, and they can make their community stronger. And who doesn't want to be part of something bigger than themselves? And so I love what you guys are doing for the mental health. You're not here for mental health, but you are, because if we get your mission done right, believe me, there are going to be less people who will need mental health down the line, because they're not going to have that isolation that really pathologizes mental illness. The worst thing you can do for someone is lock them up in solitary confinement. Worst thing you could do for someone addiction is isolate them, marginalize them. They'll just get worse and worse. We, in recovery, that's the key, whether you're from mental illness or addiction, is social connection. That's why we're fighting for the clubhouse model. That's why we're fighting for reimbursement for sober living. It's why we're fighting for recovery workplaces so people can be supported. Because if people feel they're embraced, nothing can stop us. Thanks so much.
One more round of applause for our two speakers. Thank you. So thank you, Patrick. So hello, everyone. I'm Eddie Garcia. I am the board vice chair of the Coalition to End Social Isolation and Loneliness. I'm also the founder and board chair of the Foundation for Social Connection. And together, these two organizations have worked to create the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection, which is a combination of 17 nations across the globe that are combating social isolation and loneliness and addressing social connection more broadly. We have been working across multinational organizations like the European Union and the World Health Organization, which you heard from earlier from Haben and Girma. And we also are going to continue to be hearing from leaders across the national and global perspective. So up first, we will now hear from researcher Dr. Nina Goldman. Dr. Goldman is a human geographer hailing from the University of Manchester, where she is halfway through her 2-year project called A Geography of Loneliness. She is currently leading a project reviewing global policies for advancing social connection with the World Health Organization's Commission on Social Connection, which you just heard about earlier. Thank you, Nina, for being with us virtually, and the stage is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you. So as you heard, I have a background in human geography, which has flavored my approach to the field of loneliness. So before starting on my actual research project, I got sidetracked a little bit with some great policy work. I quickly realized while delving into the topic of loneliness that the best approach to a new topic was probably to start with an observation of the second order. In other words, to observe the observer. And in this specific case, is what are governments doing to address loneliness? In which context do they mention it? So we started last year by reviewing 52 countries in the UN European Country Group. This also included the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Israel. We looked at national level documents and found that 14 countries had published some things, and we identified 23 documents we looked at in more detail. We found an increasing prioritization of loneliness as a public health, but also societal issue. And some interesting findings that I'd like to share with you that we didn't include in the paper, but are still worth mentioning. New Zealand doesn't have a national policy per se, but they have lots of great work by NGOs, and there seems to be some considerable national awareness of loneliness. Also a reminder that Danish loneliness strategy started out with work from NGOs and sort of built up on that. Canada also has excellent resources for policymakers, but they don't have any national strategy yet. Some countries without national strategies do have more localized strategies. So we do find cities, for example, that have their own strategies against loneliness. So for example, we have Barcelona in Spain, Helsinki in Finland, and Vancouver in Canada. And I'm sure there are many more cities around the world that have their own sort of citywide strategy to address loneliness. Out of all these documents that we reviewed, we found that about 1/3 of them targeted older adults and the rest addressed the general population. It's probably not surprising since many documents also focused on older adults that loneliness would be mentioned in this context. We found it very difficult to find evidence of funding to actually support all these efforts against or in addressing loneliness and social isolation. There might be hidden in some state budgets, but that's just a bit difficult to identify. Loneliness was addressed across a multitude of different sectors, which is super encouraging, actually. So we found dimensions where loneliness were mentioned were in urban planning, housing, community, health, work, politics, all that kind of stuff. We didn't find a strong commitment yet to evaluate these interventions. So we still, and also what many documents did not mention or didn't really focus on was sort of an understanding of the nuances of loneliness. Loneliness can come from different sources, and that was not really mentioned, but is quite important if we think about targeted interventions. So this work, as Eddie has said, has been extended to a global review for the WHO. It has stricter inclusion criteria, so we are only really looking at documents that are strategies, policies, or action plans on the national level, because that's the sphere of influence from the WHO. So across the globe, we looked at all the UN countries, scraped the internet with lots of student researchers speaking many different languages. We could actually only identify 6 countries that had fully fledged documents. I'll name them in order from old to newest. So the UK has the first document we found that was published in 2018. Then we have Japan, Denmark, the US, the Netherlands, and Germany. They all had very different approaches in designing these policies. So we know from Denmark, as I said before, it was very much a bottom-up approach. Loads of NGOs and organizations came together to sort of write this strategy. So the ownership of the Danish strategy is very high. The US, as you might well know, preaching to the choir here, has a very top-down strategy. So the advisory was written by a group of researchers, and it's very well written. I'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. We know that Sweden and Finland are currently working on their own loneliness policies as well. The Swedish one will be published in February 2025. The Finnish one, I'm not quite sure yet. So, since you are mainly in the US, and this might be preaching to the choir a little bit, I'm sorry, but this is also for the internationals who are dialing in. The US advisory on loneliness is very well written, well defined, very nice. A big fan of that. It outlines the importance of social connection for the individual and community health and shows severe consequences when social connections are lacking. The advisory addresses loneliness, which is also in the title, Our Epidemic of Loneliness, but focuses more strongly on social connection, which is seen as an antidote to loneliness. On a global perspective, we don't see this strong focus on social connection. It is more, at the moment at least, focused on loneliness and social isolation. So that's quite unique in a global context. The reasons given for this focus is that social connection, or that many people who report a lack of social connection don't necessarily report loneliness. So we can capture maybe more dimensions of social disconnection in this way. Loneliness is often, not necessarily in these policies, but maybe in public discourse, framed as an individual problem. I'm Swiss-British, and in the Swiss context, definitely it is still quite focused on the individual, which can be a little bit annoying sometimes. So the advisory talks about the cultural, community, and societal dynamics that drive social connection. So I really like this approach, focusing on the wider determinants. Other countries in their policies and documents, when they talk about loneliness, also touch on different dimensions, but maybe not quite to the same extent. What I also love about the US advisory, it establishes a call for a common framework for evaluating social connections and loneliness and interventions targeting it. We do need a common ground, because sometimes it happens that activism is faster than the research, which can lead to problems further down the line. We still don't know some fundamental things about loneliness, social isolation, and social connections, so establishing this framework will be really helpful. We know that loneliness and social isolation are not good for your mental and physical health. And we are also not very knowledgeable about the causal links between various things. Also, if we think about the built environment and loneliness. And we also don't know what levels of loneliness, for example, are problematic. Is it bad if I'm very intensely lonely just for a short period of time? Is it the same if I'm maybe a bit less lonely for a longer period of time? These are all questions that we don't have answers to yet. So what can we do? A community-based approach seems to be the way forward. I'm not the only one, thankfully, who thinks like this, but the community-based approaches to loneliness interventions are still in its infancy, also because it's highly complex to actually evaluate. And as the advisory proposes, we just need more data on what is being done on the community level, what is working. So this will be very essential. Erin Peavy will later be speaking to you about the built environment and loneliness, which is a topic that's very close to my heart as well as a geographer. The UK campaign to end loneliness also has a document on the built environment and loneliness, which might also be helpful to check out along with the report that Erin wrote. The community level can also address more broader societal level issues and tailor it to the local level. And as the speaker said before me, I think the community approach would also be maybe a way we could think about the service. What service can you give to your community, which will benefit everyone, including yourself? So in this sense, an asset-based community approach might be a nice way forward, because people usually know what their community has, what is lacking, and what is needed to make it a nice place. So a bottom-up approach might be very helpful in this regard, but I would also add, supported by some top-down legislation. For example, if we have a neighborhood that prohibits mixed use via the zoning laws, you can't even start a cafe or a community center. So I think top-down legislation can help to build the foundation on which social infrastructure and social connection can then happen. Also, I would like to advocate we don't need to reinvent the wheel on anything. There are many thinkers also from the US who know how to plan and design neighborhoods that centers around humans rather than cars, for example. One such person is Jane Jacobs. She's from the US, and she wrote a fantastic book, if you don't know it, published in 1961, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. It's a wonderful read, and many of her ideas still hold up today. Also, a Danish architect, Jan Gehl, wrote a book, City for the People, in which he culminates 40 years of practice and observations of city life in public spaces, and provides a toolkit on how we can design places centered around humans. So with this, I'd like to close and thank you for listening. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Goldman. We appreciate all the work that you're doing. We love learning from our colleagues across the globe and contributing to that learning. So as part of the coalition's work, we've had the privilege of meeting and cultivating relationships with Capitol Hill champions who have joined our efforts to create a socially connected future. We have invited these champions to share their insights and priorities throughout the day, not only so you can see their vision for a more connected nation, but also to highlight momentum on the Hill and inspire more congressional leaders to join us in the movement. As our first Hill champion of the day, I welcome Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire to the stage. Prior to serving as a United States Senator, Senator Hassan served for 3 terms in the New Hampshire State Senate and as the 81st governor of New Hampshire. I'm thrilled that Senator Hassan recently co-sponsored the Improving Measurement for Loneliness and Isolation Act that would establish a working group to formulate recommendations for standardized measurements and loneliness and isolation, a key priority of the coalition and the Foundation's Scientific Advisory Council. Please join me in giving the Senator a warm welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Eddie, for the kind introduction and for everything that you're doing to address social isolation and loneliness. I'm really grateful for the invitation to be here and the opportunity to speak with all of you this afternoon. And it is good to see my friend Congressman Patrick Kennedy here too. Thank you for all your work and leadership. Look, we're here today because of our concern about the loneliness epidemic sweeping our country. So I want to talk about why we've seen this alarming rise in loneliness and social isolation in America, the dangers it represents, and some of the ways that we can work together to address what is a mounting challenge. The America of 2024 should be, by many metrics, the most connected society in human history. With the internet and social media, we know details about each other's daily lives, interests, and politics that we may never have known before. Most of us are just a phone call, text, or email away from just about anyone in the country, if not the world. Yet in many cases, the very technological advances designed to bring us together have also created a virtual world that has isolated people from real human connections. Not so long ago, it was easier to forge social connections than it is today. Gone are the days where most people in any given community belong to the same bowling league, church group, or Rotary Club, where half the town belonged to the local American Legion. Of course, our country was always more complicated a place than what could be captured by the brushstrokes of Norman Rockwell. Depression and isolation have always existed. But across virtually all meaningful metrics, people today find it harder than they used to forge community. The increase in loneliness and social isolation presents significant tangible dangers. I don't need to remind you all here that loneliness can lead to depression, anxiety, and even thoughts of suicide. And it can lead to other drastic negative health consequences as well, increasing the risk of heart disease, stroke, and developing dementia. The Surgeon General has compared the health consequences of loneliness to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. The rise in loneliness and social isolation also presents a danger to our democracy. Our system of self-government depends on each of us, recognizing that while we may not agree on everything, as Americans, we're still part of the same team. We have to find ways to work together because our futures are inexorably linked. Feeling disconnected from one another, even fearing each other, strains the bonds of community needed to sustain a democracy. When people feel isolated, they also can become more inclined to spiral into extremism. They become prey to political leaders or forces that push misinformation or kindle resentments. And people of all ages and political stripes behind the walls of the internet find it easier to share extremist views, echo hate, and disparage their fellow Americans. So what can we do? The challenge of loneliness and isolation can't be overcome with any one law or perhaps even any set of laws. And we need to be realistic about the fact that loneliness is not something that the government can just wipe away. But there are areas where Congress can play a constructive role. While we are still figuring out what progress on this issue looks like, I'm encouraged by the bipartisan collaboration we've started to have. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy and Republican Governor Spencer Cox, for instance, have led the charge on ways to tackle loneliness head on. And I know that you'll hear later today from my friend and colleague, Democratic Senator Tina Smith, who's helped tear down stigma by sharing her own experience with depression, and who's led legislative efforts to address mental health and loneliness. I'm also working across the aisle on some measures that could start to help. For instance, I'm pushing for bipartisan legislation that's called the Improving Measurements for Loneliness and Isolation Act, which would standardize the definition of loneliness so that we can better study and understand its impacts, just as we do with any other health risks. And I'm working on legislation that would promote intergenerational care. For example, encouraging childcare and early learning programs to be placed at long-term care facilities for seniors, sparking connection between generations and bringing communities closer together. We've already seen the benefits of these programs in places all across the country, including in my home state of New Hampshire. And I'm sure that you'll hear more today about other bipartisan efforts to better support our youth in their communities, such as by strengthening mental health services for kids and protecting them from online bullying. The good news is that we've started to make progress on many of these fronts. For instance, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was passed into law in 2022 provides many measures to support mental health. Earlier this month, I heard from people who are engaged in one of these efforts in New Hampshire, This is an effort funded by funding from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and it's supporting a partnership in which the University of New Hampshire is training social work students. And while they are studying to become social workers on a school social work pathway, they're placed in Manchester schools to provide direct services to students. I think the number is going to be about 80 in the Manchester School District. So the bills that I just discussed, the funding from the Bipartisan Communities Safer Act, are ones with bipartisan support. And it's important to note that because, of course, we know that feelings of loneliness can affect people of any age or background, regardless of whether they vote red or blue. The efforts of everyone participating here today are just as important, if not more important, than what Congress is doing. If we're going to meet this crisis head on, each of us will have to do our part to combat loneliness. Because behind all of the statistics and figures that we're discussing today are people. People who may be your patients or your students, or may just be the person who you happen to see at the neighborhood coffee shop. It's the 20-something who moved to a new city who has no friends outside of work. The retired veteran who never married and spends most days alone in front of the television. The teenage girl who should feel optimistic about her future, but instead wonders if anyone would even care if she is gone. This country is supposed to be a place where everyone counts, where each and every person matters. That's the very definition of a democracy. It's also the essence of community. But we are not a community nor a democracy if we share a common land and a common distrust, but fail to develop a common bond or common purpose. And we can't be connected as humans if all we do through social media is know everything about each other except the very things that make knowing somebody worthwhile. Loneliness is not an easy challenge to discuss, nor is it an easy one to fix. But together, we can help save lives and ensure that in our country, everyone counts. So, a thank you to everyone here for your dedication to taking on this challenge to help your fellow Americans, humans, transcend loneliness and build relationships and community. I am really proud to be a partner with all of you in that effort. Thanks for your work.
Thank you to the senator. We are so grateful for your leadership and then look forward to continuing to work with you. Our final speaker we have now, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Adam Levine, not the singer. Adam, Adam is the SNF Agora Professor of Health Policy and Management in the Bloomberg School of Public Health here at Johns Hopkins. In addition to his academic work, he is president and co-founder of Research for Impact, a nonprofit that translates his research findings into practice for creating powerful new collaborative relationships between researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. Thank you, Dr. Levine, for joining us here today.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am thrilled to be here. And I love the fact that like the Maroon 5 reference happened. People often ask me, what's it like to have the name Adam Levine? And I often say it's basically filled with like disappointment because, you know, you check into a hotel and people were like, oh, you know, we saw your name on the list and we're kind of wondering. And then this like 5'6" guy shows up. But anyway, you all weren't expecting that. And so here I am. And so I'm really thrilled to be here. And I'm really thrilled, actually, especially to sort of be able to speak after some of all the amazing speakers we've heard so far. And that's because, like, I recognize that many of you, if not all of you in the room, you are decision makers you're trying to figure out, like, what to do about a really important public health challenge in communities that you care about. And the thing is that I study not so much loneliness per se, but I study the science of collaboration in civic life and apply it to a lot of different issue areas. And so I want to sort of talk about sort of some of the fundamentals related to that and how it can be useful to you. So in order to do that, I'm first going to sort of tell a story. And then I'm going to sort of talk about some research findings. And then I'm going to end with a couple of questions for you to think about basically as you're sort of walking out of the room this afternoon. So first, the story. So in 2017, I faced, me and a couple of colleagues faced a very similar situation to what a lot of what we've heard about today, especially what Dr. Goldman described. Which is we knew of a lot of people who are working to understand and to address public health challenges on a wide variety of loneliness, mental health, lack of transportation opportunities, poor air quality, all sorts of things. Researchers, practitioners, policymakers, a whole bunch of people who are working to address these challenges and essentially sort of like wanted to work together, wanted new collaborative relationships to try to figure out what to do, what would work in communities that they care about, and really sort of how to move forward. But they were disconnected. And so what we said is, all right, let's build a way for them to sort of connect more easily. And so what we did is we built the first version, version 1.0 of Research for Impact. And it was an online platform where researchers and practitioners and also policymakers, but it was mostly practitioners at the time, could build profiles, and then they could reach out to each other. And so what people could do is they could put a picture in the profile. There were all these open-ended questions, and they could fill out like, what are their collaboration, like previous experiences? What are their goals? And then having done that, they could just reach out to each other on the platform. And so we were like, great, like this sounds amazing. Let's do it. So we developed it. We had a big like kickoff event in Washington, D.C. at the beginning of 2017. Like over 100 people came to it, standing room only. We launched it. Within the first 10 months, 388 people had built profiles. And this was great. And we were like, woohoo, this is amazing, right? Because all of these people had like taken the time, so they like demonstrated that they had capacity. They obviously were interested. They had taken advantage of an opportunity. All of the like major barriers to sort of civic engagement, voluntarily engaging with others to solve a problem in a community that you care about, had basically been overcome, or so we thought. So 388 people built profiles. Within the first 10 months, 7 people had actually used the platform, had actually reached out to somebody else. Whew, that was a disappointment. And 6 of them were researchers reaching out to practitioners. We had 1 practitioner reached out to a researcher in that entire 10 months. So that was like, so it was really disappointing. And so I'm just going to tell you right now, like there was definitely a moment of like, oh my Lord, we've spent like months developing this thing and like letting people know about it and blah, blah, blah. And like, it really just sort of felt like a giant failure because it kind of was. I mean, in vanity metrics, we were doing great, but I sort of, but like in terms of like our theory of change, like, really it was bad news. So anyway, so after a while, I sort of like kind of licked my wound, so to speak. And I said, this is like weird. Because again, like, people demonstrated that they had time, to build these profiles. They demonstrate interest. They took advantage of an opportunity, but yet they didn't sort of like, kind of take that leap into the pool. And so I sort of put my researcher hat on and I said to myself, like, all right, let me try to figure out what's going on here. So I started reaching out to some people and people, again, who had come to our kickoff event. They'd built these profiles. And I said, hey, I'm just curious, like, like what's going on? Like, did we screw something up? Is there something about the way, is the platform just not working for you? And let me tell you, like, it was like the floodgates just opened up. Because what happened is that people started revealing to me all of these like relational barriers that they had, all of this uncertainty, what I sort of came to refer to as uncertainty about relationality that they were experiencing, that made them sort of like basically stop dead in their tracks for reaching out to somebody who was a decision maker who brought a diverse form of expertise to problems that they cared about. So when I say uncertainty about relationality, I'll unpack that a little bit. You're stuck with the researcher on stage. And so, I got to unpack it a little bit, right? And so like, what were they talking about specifically? So some of it was about the information that would be shared. So people said things like, well, I'm not sure if I can really sort of like trust what they're going to share with me. So that was something. I'm not sure they really have practical information to share about the kinds of problems or challenges that I care about. Okay. But then there was the other stuff. So it wasn't just about the information to be shared. It was also about like, what's the experience of interacting with this person going to be like? Are they necessarily like going to care about what I have to say? Are they going to value my expertise on the issue? We know from like decades of social psychology research that there can often be a gap between sort of having expertise and having that expertise be socially recognized. And status-based stereotypes can very much get in the way and drive those two things apart. So that was a concern. There was also a concern simply about like what I often refer to as script concerns. Do I know what's appropriate and inappropriate to say? There was also concerns about, will this person just criticize me? There were also concerns about, will this person even just be interested in interacting with me or act like I'm bothering them? And so there were all of this stuff about the experience of interacting. And then there was the whole bucket of expectations, because the issue with collaboration is we throw that word around a lot, but it means very different things to different people in different contexts. And so people were uncertain, honestly, is it okay if I just want to talk to somebody for knowledge exchange? Or might they be expecting a more sort of formal partnership where we share ownership and decision-making authority and accountability over some kind of project? Both forms of collaboration, as well as sort of things in between, are fantastic and can be incredibly impactful. But, people sometimes mean different things when they talk about collaboration. So anyway, through that experience, what I sort of came to realize that there was all of this invisible stuff that we know matters, and we know matters in our everyday lives for interacting with people, with real life people. But yet, what I was hearing was sort of this uncertainty about I don't know what it's going to be like to interact with this person and the information, and I'm hesitant as a result. Okay, so that's my story. So what came of that? And I'm going to share a couple of research findings very quickly too. Nothing in too much detail, but a little bit quickly. So a couple of different things sort of came out of that experience over time. And this sort of leads to a couple of fundamentals about collaboration, which I really sort of hope that you sort of take forward out of this room. So one is simply the fact that there can be this kind of unmet desire to collaborate. What I was observing was essentially that people can value it, say it's a good idea, want it at some level, but yet not necessarily initiate it on their own. So it won't necessarily rise on their own. That's especially a concern when it's voluntary, which is what we were talking about, and when it's between strangers, which is also really what we were talking about. The other thing is that in addition to, I think, more common barriers, like, for example, not having time and things like that, it's also the case that there can be this uncertainty about relationality. And, that is a real invisible barrier that people often don't talk about quite as much. So, okay, so given all of that, what to do? So I've actually studied this in a number of different contexts, and I've done randomized controlled trials to try to understand how can we build new collaborative relationships between people who have diverse forms of expertise but don't know each other and might be hesitant about interacting with each other for a wide variety of reasons. And so I'll tell you about sort of a couple of things I've learned from doing that. So one is it turns out, and this kind of sounds obvious after the fact, but yet I think is not always obvious ex ante, which is directly communicating relationality can be really impactful. So just to kind of demonstrate that, so I did a study in which we were trying to build new collaborative relationships between researchers and climate organizers across the United States. And I partnered with an organization that has climate organizers in every congressional district across the country. And what we were trying to do is try to say, okay, what might lead these climate organizers to want to interact with researchers? Again, it's voluntary. Again, they're starting off as strangers. And so I partnered with the organization where what we did is we offered this opportunity to them. And so we said, we're going to connect you with a researcher to talk about various challenges that they were facing. And I won't go into the details because it's not quite as important for right now. But what we did is we did this randomized controlled trial where we varied the nature of the outreach. So some people just got a simple, we're going to connect you, here's an opportunity for a collaborative relationship to talk about this research that might be relevant and how it might work in your area. But then what we also knew in advance that some of the volunteer group leaders, the organizers, they might be really hesitant about interacting with researchers, in part because researchers have a tendency, present company excluded, of course, to just sort of go on and not necessarily respect people's time and whatnot, and recognize other people have time constraints. And also that researchers may not necessarily, always value expertise that other people have. And I have some fantastic quotes that I'm happy to share in the hallway afterwards on that. And so what we did is in the outreach, some people got the basic opportunity, but then we randomly assigned other people to basically get extra information embedded in the opportunity. And in some cases, what they got is a paragraph that said that the researchers are really excited to connect and are really excited to learn about your local area and how to think about how the research might apply or not apply in your area. So that's kind of valuing your expertise. And then in other cases, we said the researchers recognize that folks are busy and they're just going to share a concentrated dose of news you can use. And let me tell you, adding those two paragraphs in two different conditions of this experiment dramatically increased the take-up rates. I mean, I'm talking about doubling the take-up rates of the organizers who said, yeah, actually, I would like to interact with the researcher. And all we were doing is we were just being explicit about what it would be like when the researcher and the climate organizer were interacting. So that's one thing, directly communicating relationality. The second thing is to use third parties. And so I kind of I didn't finish my story from before. So I said it was Research for Impact 1.0. Well, so after it didn't work, after the online platform wasn't working, we decide, all right, let's basically keep everything the same, okay? But I'm gonna offer hands-on matchmaking. I'm basically gonna offer to people in the networks, I will connect you with somebody. I'll sort of, serve as that kind of third party. And that just like dramatically increase the demand as well. And so what we've done, so that started in 2018. Within the first 4 years, we had built over 350 new collaborative relationships as a result of people actually saying, oh yes, well actually now that you're offering this, that sounds amazing. So I want to so those are really the findings I wanted to share. And so now what I want to do is sort of take a step back and kind of sum up, and then I'm going to put some questions for folks to think about up on the screen. And so again, I mean, I think, what the things I've learned about sort of studying the science of collaboration in civic life is really that there can be this kind of unmet desire, and that it can arise because people are strangers and who bring diverse forms of expertise and are hesitant to interact with each other in a wide variety of ways. And that kind of uncertainty about relationality, in addition to common barriers, like, for example, not having time constraints are absolutely a real thing. Money constraints can absolutely be a real thing, that can really sort of stop people dead in their tracks. So what I want to do is I want to sort of take a bunch of the different things that I just mentioned over the past like 10 to 12 minutes. And I want to sort of put a list of questions up on the screen that kind of tie it together in a number of different ways. And I also really want to emphasize that like throughout, like, we often sort of hear that like, oh, relationships are important. Like, and I hear that a lot. Relationships are important. And that's absolutely the case. But I really want to sort of underscore that that's not really what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that like everybody I've been talking about here, they know that relationships are important. The thing that's like stopping them is that they're uncertain how to get from here to there. That's the thing that's stopping them. So let me see if this, oh, there we go. So let me, so these questions, there's going to be 5 of them. I'll put them up on the screen one by one, because otherwise there'll be just a giant block of text. And really this is meant to sort of guide like your thinking and hopefully be helpful for thinking about like, what kind of unmet desire to collaborate might you have? And thinking about, these are the kinds of questions that are also going to come up later on this afternoon in one of the small groups. And so first of all, what types of loneliness relevant work do you conduct? And what kinds of decision makers do you want or need to engage with? And so that might be leaders of advocacy organizations, might be community organizers, community members, elected appointed policymakers and their staff, researchers, others, whomever. Okay. That's the first one. The second one is, would you be looking for informal collaboration? And so what I mean by that is knowledge exchange and or formal collaboration. New projects over which you share ownership, decision-making authority, and accountability. And there can be things in between too. Sometimes we talk about coordination as people who are agreeing to hold each other accountable, but may not necessarily officially share decision-making authority. But I think informal and formal is a reasonable place to start. What hesitations do you have about interacting with them? But also, what hesitations do you think they might have about interacting with you? That could be capacity, that could be interest. It could be stereotypes. It could be other kinds of relational concerns, like some of the things that I mentioned. Why should they want to engage in a collaborative relationship with you? And then, do they know that? Because I think there can be a gap between us saying, like, we know why this is important or why we think this would be important and valuable and impactful, but they might not necessarily know. And it really is just a matter that they just haven't thought much about it before. I certainly get that all the time when I'm connecting people to go off and sort of try to solve problems about how do we get this new bike lane in a part of the city that really lacks bike infrastructure, for example. Okay. And then the fifth question is, why do you think these connections don't exist already? And so those are all my questions. And I really want to sort of, again, emphasize that like each of them comes from a place of thinking about, we're talking about building collaborative relationships to solve problems in communities we care about, but often they are voluntary and they're between people who don't know each other. And so these are the kinds of questions that are really helpful for surfacing unmet desire and then really sort of provide an amazing starting point and platform for thinking about, okay, great. Now what? What do we do next? And I know that that's going to come up in the small group sessions later on this afternoon. All right, so hopefully I have been more interesting than other Adam Levines. What I'm going to do, or at least as interesting, do not ask me to sing. Like, trust me, don't ask that. But anyway, I really thank you so much for being here, for listening to me, and I will look forward to hopefully interacting with a bunch of you later on this afternoon.